VP sir, shall we start? Sir, VP sir?
Good morning. Yes, sir. Good morning.
Shall we start, sir? We are waiting only
Dean
for
sir
you.
வராங்களா?
இல்ல sir, நம்ம அங்க SNH
no
Dean
problem.
வராரு. SNH Dean இருக்கார். We'll start, sir.
Sorry for this.
Ganesh sir, shall we start?
Yes, ma. Yes.
Okay. Savita?
Yes, ma'am. Very good morning to one and all present here, and thank you for joining us at the two-day conference on the contemporaneity of language and literature in the robotized millennium. On behalf of the Department of English and other foreign languages, SRM Institute of Science and Technology, Ramapuram, I extend a warm welcome to everyone here. Let us start the program with the blessings of the Almighty. Join us for the Tamil Thai Valthu.
நிலமடந்தை கெழிலொழுகும் சீராரும் மதனமென திகழ்வனத கண்டமிதில் நித்தனமும் அதில் சிறந்த திராவிடனல் திருநாடும் அக்க சிறு நிறை நுடலும் தரித்தனரும் திலகமுமே அத்திலக வாசனை போல் அனைத்துலகும் இன்பமுற எத்திசையும் புகழ் மணக்க இருந்த பெரும் தமிழனங்கே தமிழனங்கே உன் சீரிழமை திறந்து எந்து செய்ய மறந்து வாழ்ந்ததுமே வாழ்ந்ததுமே வாழ்ந்ததுமே.
I now request Dr. Rama, Professor and Head, Department of English and other foreign languages, to welcome the gathering and present the conference report 2020.
Thank you, Savita. Good morning to the August gathering. Good morning to each and every one of you assembled here to attend the second RSRI conference on contemporaneity of language and literature in the robotized millennium, jointly organized by SRM Institute of Science and Technology, Ramapuram campus and REST Society for Research International. It's been 1 year of the first RSRI conference held last October 2019, but the memories are so green and vivid in my mind as I walk down memory lane. We had assembled in a huge auditorium and we were able to lavish hospitality on our guests and participants. We were able to see a lot of action, and most importantly, we had our bubbly students adding glow to the conference. All that is missing now, but definitely, friends, not our spirit. We are here once again to launch the second edition of the conference, and the only difference is it is in the online mode. Meticulous efforts have been taken to run all the sessions in a smooth manner, of course, within our human control. We have good participation in all languages: English, Tamil, French, Japanese, and German. And the number of papers this time, the response has increased, and it's from all over the country. So I want to thank all the participants. Language and literature have always fascinated many of us. It continues to do so. I have no doubt about it. To reiterate this and provide more insights, we are extremely privileged to have a medley of very experienced and enthusiastic keynote speakers. Dr. Ganesh, professor formerly of MCC Chennai, is a stalwart in the literary arena and needs no introduction. The inauguration acquires great sheen merely by the presence of this towering personality. His eloquent inaugural and the following keynote address on preserving humanity, the value of language and literature, I assure you all would be the greatest takeaway in this entire conference for the participants. I welcome you, sir, most wholeheartedly to the conference. The post-lunch session of today, day one, will witness an articulate presentation by Dr. Swarnalatha, Professor of English, IIT Madras, on the topic Writing the Earth Darkly, the Green Literary Imperative in the Anthropocene. Day two will commence with a delightful keynote talk by Dr. Sushma V. Murthy, Associate Professor, Department of English, Christ University, Bangalore, on Discourses Beyond the Divide, Integrating Contemporary Approaches to Gender in the Literature class. The post-lunch session of day two will be a treat for the lovers of foreign languages, where we have Dr. Nalini J. Thambi, Professor, Department of French, School of Humanities, Pondicherry University, to present her insightful keynote address on Trapped Between Shackling Norms and a Life Without Borders, the Ultimate Choice of Kenza, and a parallel talk by our valedictory guest, Dr. Maniruzzaman, Professor of English, Jahangirnagar University, Dhaka, Bangladesh, on English language education in the new normal, on-site plus online learning. We are also privileged to listen to an introductory session on German by Dr. Matthew John from FLU, Hyderabad. He will chair the German session too. We are extremely thankful and grateful to our session chairs, Dr. Anbarakan Vijay from Government College of Technology, Coimbatore, Dr. Nalini Thambi from Pondicherry University, Dr. Adeline Albert from Ethiraj College, Chennai, Dr. Sharmila Asharif from Pondicherry University, Dr. Mahadevan from Tyagaraja College, Chennai for the Tamil session, Dr. Vinmayal from V.V. Vanyaperumal College, Virudhunagar, Mrs. Uma Balu, Japanese session, Japanese language and culture professional and founder Sahara Asia, who will also present a Japanese introductory session on impressive symbolism, comparative study of Japanese and Tamil usage, and Dr. Jayapal Sharmili from Pondicherry University. Our institution has been very supportive of all our ventures, and this conference is no exception. The management, heads of the institution, and our department faculty members have made this conference happen. Specific mention must be made of the inspiring presence and motivation by Dr. C. Sundar, Dean Science and Humanities, who has always been beside us to extend all possible help in all our endeavors. Any event or program organized by our department is adorned by our ever-inspiring Dr. K.N. Srinivas, Vice Principal Academic of Engineering and Technology. My gratitude to both of you, sir, and hearty welcome, sirs. Professor Ramachandran of RSRI, our sponsor, has been working very closely with us and implementing all our suggestions. Without his team, this conference would rather be on paper only. Despite the commencement of classes, the participants have taken all pains to join the conference and present their papers. Contribution by so many people has resulted in this conference, in this very memorable program, the second RSRI International Conference today. Friends, I am extremely overwhelmed by all the support extended by all of you, and I bow in thankfulness to each one of you. I extend a warm welcome to all of you with extended hands. Welcome all once again, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, ma'am. A ray of light is a ray of hope. As a mark of our tradition to invoke the Almighty, we'll start the inauguration today with the lighting of the Kuttuvilakku. May the lamp be lit.
सरस्वती नमस्तुभ्यं वरदे कामरूपिणि विद्यारम्भं करिष्यामि सिद्धिर्भवतु मे सदा विद्यारम्भं करिष्यामि सिद्धिर्भवतु मे सदा नमस्तुभ्यं वरदे कामरूपिणि विद्यारम्भं करिष्यामि सिद्धिर्भवतु मे सदा
I welcome our Vice Principal Academic, Engineering and Technology to present his felicitations.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, all. The respected Dean of Science and Humanities, Dr. Sundar sir, the HOD of English and Foreign Languages, Dr. Rema, organizers, and the Chief Guest, Dr. Ganesh Krishnamurthy sir. I wish all of you a warm good morning for this conference. I would like to place on record now that the SRM Institute of Science and Technology at Ramapuram campus, in this pandemic period, that is during this corona period, during the lockdown period, this institution has planned very well at the time of March itself.
Excuse me, sir, you are not audible.
I am speaking. Is it audible now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, I think I have to keep my mic closer to my mouth. During the lockdown starting period, by the month of March itself, March 20th, I believe, we had a head of the institution meeting and HOD's meeting, and we decided to have all the academic research related activities properly done continuously. Keeping the pandemic period as an excuse, we were directed by the higher officials of the institution that we should not keep quiet. We should not relax. So right from March 20th onwards, this university has been doing varieties of programs. All the departments. We have engineering technology about 6 departments, and humanities and science about 4 departments, and MBA, MCA, film technology, dental. Everybody started organizing varieties of programs. Hundreds, 200s, 300s, it went on, and all were of good quality. It is not to have bigger number of quantity we have conducted, and we have conducted various events, workshops, faculty development program, short-term training program, conferences, various webinars on special topics of interest, new engineering technology field. Everything has been done very beautifully. In that line, today I find a conference is being conducted by the EFL department online. I congratulate the department and I appreciate the department for this effort. And I find that it is going to be of 1 or 2 days with eminent personalities talking on the topic of the conference. It is good. And I think all the other departments also, they are doing various events, conferences also they are doing. This is a second edition. I think last edition was not online. Now it is online. The next edition, I believe that should not be online. We pray the Almighty that we will be able to have it continuously. So I wish the conference all the success and do it very well. I'll be a part of this whenever my time permits. All the best for the organizers. Welcome again for all the dignitaries, especially to Dr. Ganesh Krishnamurthy.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir. RSRI Society for Research International is an independent, private, non-profit, interdisciplinary, professional research society. RSRI is functioned by a group of researchers of various areas of specializations across the world. The society recognizes the research contributions through the various distinguished awards and publications in association with one of its initiatives, REST Publisher, which publishes various journals and books. I take immense pleasure to thank them profusely and acknowledge them for their association with us in sponsoring our conference for the second consecutive year. I invite Professor Ramachandran, Administration Head, RSRI, to present his special address.
Hello, good morning to all. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, Honorable Chief Guest, Dr. Ganesh, Professor, Madras Christian College, respected Dr. C. Sundar, Dean, SNH, respected Dr. K. N. Srinivas, Vice Principal, Academic ENT, respected Dr. Rema, HOD, Department of English and Other Foreign Language, Dr. Savita, Coordinator of the conference, co-coordinators, organizing committee members, and my dear participants. On behalf of REST Society for Research International, I welcome everyone to second RSRI conference on contemporaneity of language and literature in the robotized millennium. RSRI is conducting various conferences in association with reputed institutes in various titles for all disciplines, and this conference one of the iconic one among all, because in this we are focused more on language, which is a basic stone of entire what you can say research stuff. And we are also conducting FTPs students in the last corona pandemic. We almost trained 10,000 researchers in the field of data analysis, and that was taken care by us last 4 months. And this particular conference, we are very much appreciate the great efforts taken by Dr. Rema and her team to make the conference a successful one. I want to quote few things about this conference when we thought of doing. Tamil Nadu is famous for conducted Tamil language conference, namely first, intermediate, and last. In Tamil, we used to say Mudachangam, Idachangam, Kadachangam. Due to that, several epics, poems, and so on were well documented, and today we are using most of that. The paper presented in this conference also going to be well documented in both print and digital version, and especially digital version was documented with digital object identifier, which is we are usually called as POI, in which the document will be preserved entirely in generations. Second thing, I just want to quote two things with the importance of language and its documentation with two incidents happened in the history. I always feel like these two things in my mind. The first thing is everybody knows Silapadikaram epic. If you are from Tamil Nadu, due to misspell of one word, the Pandyan kingdom gone to destruction. And second thing, in India, knowledge is always usually shared orally. Example, Bhagavad Gita was orally delivered to Arjuna by Krishna. Shastras also orally delivered by great saints to their students. But if you go to other religions like Christianity, their 10 commandments were given to their devotees in written form. As well as in Islam also, they given in well documented form. That's the reason the commandments or the verses were not disturbed or misinterpreted. But when it comes to in Indian tradition or whatever the Hinduism tradition, most of the things are misinterpreted, and we have several versions for a single verse. So that is why we have
Sir, Ramachandran sir.
Sir, you are not audible.
Ramachandran sir.
I think he must have lost connectivity, but he's there in the forum. Hello, sir. Savita?
Yes, ma'am.
Savita, we will move because sir is waiting for a very long time.
Okay, ma'am.
Dean sir.
Okay. Now I request our Dean, Science and Humanities, to present his presidential address.
Most distinguished dignitaries, most esteemed participants, happy morning to all. It gives me immense pleasure and privilege to be the part of the second international conference on contemporaneity of language and literature in the robotized millennium. So, respected guest of the day, Professor Ganesher and Professor Ramachandran from RSRI, Dr. Rama ma'am, HOD EFL, and my dear colleagues in EFL department. At the outset, I congratulate the Department of EFL organizing a second edition of the research conference, which will provide a platform to the research scholar as well as the teaching fraternity to present the research work in this forum. So I'm very much impressed about the title, and also I'm very much impressed about a point mentioned by Dr. Emma during her welcome address. So language and literature is playing a pivotal role in the preserving humanity. So that is a theme of the conference. So now we are talking about advancement in the science and technology. So now we are talking about n number of things, but we miss to preserve the humanity, but we are miss to the cultivate or motivate the student to take up language and literature, or to reach out the language and literature to the nook and corner. So now we have more number of humans are there, but humanities is missing. So again, to give the importance of humanity, so again we have to give importance to language and literature. It is not meaning that we have to give specific language, either it is in English or it is Tamil or it's any other language, but a language and literature should give primost important for any other country. That society will come up. So otherwise, if we focus only on the technological aspect, if we miss to focus on the literature and the language, so definitely that particular society never come up or never reach certain high. So 600, 700 years back, India is a number one, playing in a different aspect. India is number one. So slowly, so we lose that language and literature. So now we come down, we are facing a lot of miserable. So I think the language department organizing, and that too taking up of language and literature in the theme of the conference in the robotized millennium, that is okay. So how technology help us the teaching fraternity of language and literature, taking these two things to the nook and corner. So that we are going to discuss elaborately. So now, as my part, I like to share a few things about literature. So literature helps and understands the life. So it is through reading a great literary and poetic works, so that one understand life. So life, we are talking about the life. So we are not talking about anything else. So they help a person take a closer look at the different facets of living. In many ways, literature in its different forms can change one perspective towards living. So now all the gurus are emerged. So now they're talking about art of living. So now we are also take this literature and understand. Now we are in direct contact with the student and the youth. They are the pillars of the country. So now we want to focus and give importance through the language and literature through our student community. By studying the biography of great people, real life stories of courage, sacrifice, and good values, so never fail to inspire readers. Such works give the masses an insight into the lives of eminent peoples. So literature provides information. So literature serves as an enormous information base. So research works by the famous inventors and literary work by the notable scientists often narrate stories of the groundbreaking discovery and inferences. So ongoing development in the fields of science and technology are documented so that the world can know about them. Several ancient scriptures relating stories to the human evolution and narratives of human life in those times have been tremendous help to the mankind. So thus literature always served as an authentic source of information. So literature is so important for the breadth of knowledge it gives, the moral value it carries, and the enjoyment it provides. Literature is important. An exposure to good literary work is essential at every phase of life as it enriches us in as more than many ways in as one. So in fact, it lays a foundation on fulfilling life. It adds life to living. So in this connection, I understand that the conference has received a lot of research paper from across the state. And in this junction, we extend on behalf of SRM group of institution, so we extend sincere thanks and gratitude to RSRI society. So those are sponsoring for these research conferences. This is the second time they are sponsoring. And once again, my deep sense of appreciation to the Department of EFL, all the staff members. I closely witnessing the tireless work for making the conference is a live and grand success. And I wish the department EFL should organize a number of conference as well as the programs. It will be directly benefit to the scholars as well as the student community. So we are also fortunate enough, Professor Ganesh, a stalwart in the English EFL. So Char is with us, and we are also eagerly awaiting to hear the valuable insights and information from Professor Ganesh. So thanks for the opportunity. Thank you once again. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Krishnamurthy Ganesh joined the Department of English, Madras Christian College in June 1986 and continued to serve the department till he retired in May 2019. With a passion to literature inculcated by his amazing teachers in MCC, he taught 3 generations of students. His doctoral research was on metadrama in both Oriental and Occidental traditions, and his research and teaching interests are theatres of the world, film studies, ecology, literature, and development of English studies in India and India studies, and Shakespeare in diverse contexts. He became the head of the Department of English in 2014 and had the proud privilege of serving the department in that capacity for 5 years. I most respectfully invite our chief guest to present the inaugural address.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm happy, delighted, as I'm honored to be a part of this conference on the contemporaneity of language and literature in the robotized millennium. I consider this topic to be hugely relevant as it foregrounds our concern for and concern with literature in the overtly materialistic and mechanized world. Like the Dean talked about the need for science. Science obviously cannot be discounted, but we are obviously talking about humanity, a great sense of humanity that literature is supposed to inculcate. I thank the organizers for the invitation and the team of the conference. And I wish to emphasize on the need to cling to literature as our surest stay against confusion, whatever the world we may inhabit. I will speak on two major genres of literature, poetry and drama, in order to argue for the efficacy of literature to solve the problems that we face almost on a day-to-day basis. Now, when you take the word humanity itself, humanity obviously will mean people in general, understanding and kindness towards other people. But the most important thing is the condition of being human. I think the PPT will be shown. The first slide deals with the idea of, say, what is being human? Being human is being both ethical and responsible. And literature's major purpose throughout, let's say, the millennia has always been, let's say, to inculcate in us that sense of value that we need to live not only for ourselves but for others also. So the condition of being human, I think, is the most important aspect of say, teaching literature. That's why I titled the say talk as preserving humanity. The ing form is so important that we need to continually preserve humanity in order to face, as I told you, all the, say, emotional, psychological, say, social, racial, say, castes, all kinds of, say, problems that we face in our modern world. And when you say robotized millennium, as I told you earlier, that we do live in a materialistic and mechanistic world, not to discount science, as I told you, right? Not to discount science, as I told you, but to incorporate science, as it were. Let's like say, Bertrand Russell made a significant statement. For every increase in knowledge, there must be a correlative increase in wisdom. So knowledge is not to be discounted. Knowledge need not be discounted, should not be discounted at any cost. But if knowledge doesn't serve the purpose of humanity, if it doesn't inculcate in us, as I told you, the sense of humaneness which you're supposed to have, I think that knowledge needs to be discounted. Now, can I have the PPT, please? Humanity is what we talk about. Now, I listened to an excellent speech by Morgan Freeman, one of the actors, famous actors in the Hollywood. When he received the AFI award, he made this statement with regard to movies. But I think I will replace the word movies with literature, right? I will replace the word movies with literature. He said, movies unite us, they entertain us, they teach us. Hello? They entertain us, they teach us, they inspire us, they touch the common humanity, right? They touch the common humanity. Can I have the PPT, please?
Sir?
The PPT.
Ganesh, sir?
Yeah, tell me, ma. Hello? Okay, shall I continue?
Sir, please wait.
Right, I'll just deal with this, say, quote from Morgan Freeman until the PPT is shown. So when he said movies unite us, I would say literature unites us. Later on, I'll be able to speak about the idea of cultural literacy that we are supposed to have, the supreme capacity that human beings have to absorb multiple cultures, to have knowledge of multiple cultures, not only from abroad, let's say, but also within our own, say, country, because there are cultures which have been marginalized, cultures that have been completely, say, blurred out of existence. So movies unite us, I would say literature unites us. They entertain us. Obviously, this has been one of the important traditional conceptions of literature. Entertainment, not in a populist sense, but entertainment as a capacity to move us through pleasure, a capacity to inform us, let's say, through pleasure. They teach us, obviously. They inspire us, like movies do, so does literature. And they touch the common humanity. I think that is why I thought of this particular title, Preserving Humanity. They touch the common humanity, and he made a significant statement in the diverse 7 billion people who call this planet home. Right? He made a significant statement. He said they touch the common humanity in the diverse 7 billion people who call this planet home, he said. So I think the purpose of literature is obviously to say provide us with all these also. And movies, obviously today in the context of cultural studies, movies are part of literature. Literature has expanded its horizons to include many a discourse, let's say, which would obviously come under the purview of what we used to call literature earlier. Should I wait for the PPT? Can I continue?
Yes, sir, we are trying.
Okay. Right. I'll go with that. So maybe we can begin with the next slide. Eliot very significantly anticipated this problem that this conference addresses. Right. The value of language, the value of literature in the robotized millennium. Right. Obviously, we have been mechanized. Right. You see films like Modern Times by Charlie Chaplin will tell you how mechanized we are. Right. How we have lost touch with humanity. How we have lost the capacity for feeling. Right. There is a lot of intellect, obviously, but that intellect is not ably assisted by emotion. So in that context, Eliot in Choruses from the Rock made a significant statement that all our knowledge brings us nearer to ignorance. Right? All our knowledge brings us nearer to ignorance. And thank you very much. All our ignorance brings us nearer to death, he said. Right? All our knowledge brings us nearer to ignorance. Right? Which obviously will mean that the purpose of knowledge has not led us to knowing life, or as we said earlier, tap the potential of the humaneness that all of us have. Right? All of us have. Nobody is evil in one sense. Let's say, as Bill Durant rightly said, all sin is partial vision and error. So we need to address this error. We need to address this partial vision. Right? We need to obviously become complete, like Tagore, I will quote later, mentions. So our knowledge has brought us to ignorance. Our ignorance has brought us to death. And what he means by death is not physical death, but spiritual death. And nearness to death has not led to nearness to God, primarily because we are, say, violently taken away from God. Like Yeats would say in one of the poems, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Right? So in that context, he asks this very significant question, very fond of this particular question. Where is the life we have lost in living? Right? Literature's primary question is, are we living? Or are we merely vegetating? Are we merely existing? Right? Where is the life we have lost in living? Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Right? What is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? That's why I thought about, say, Bertrand Russell, who said, for every increase in knowledge, there must be a correlative increase in wisdom. And the last one, which takes us to this idea of robotized millennium, where is the knowledge that we have lost in information? Right? Now, we are capable of a lot of information, but the point is, let's say, as this, this knowledge of information led us anywhere. Now, again and again, I need to stress that this is not, say, bashing science. This is not bashing technology. They are so useful. Without that, I don't think we'll have this conference at all. And I'm talking about a sense of attitude. Right? It is a problem of attitude that we are addressing. And you have eminent scientists like Einstein, say, who has provided us not only with science and technology, but also with great sense of humanity. So, next point that I would like to make is, right, Pablo Neruda, a great poet, made the statement: if nothing saves us from death, may love at least save us from life, the life as we live it. Right? So the purpose of preserving humanity is to obviously deal with this notion of love, because love leads to an expansiveness. Love obviously cuts asunder, let's say, our bonds of egoism and makes us move, let's say, towards the rest of humanity. So what we need, again, is this important word, love, as Pablo Neruda says, that through his poetry, he would like to do this. And then he makes a significant statement. What does he want to do with literature? What does he want to do with poetry? He says, I want to do with you, obviously he's speaking about the readers, he's speaking about the audience, right? He's speaking about the audience. I want to do with you what spring does to the cherry trees. I think for me it's an amazing metaphor. So what you have is a rejuvenation, a reawakening, a great awakening at that, let's say, where we are woken up from this slumber of ignorance. We are woken up from this slumber of, say, the slumber of inhumanity, as it were. But all of us are capable of being humane. That's what literature addresses. That's what literature addresses. So whether you take the tragedies of Shakespeare, tragedies in Greek language, all that we see is that human potential is huge. And we have failed to express, let's say, that potential through our deeds, through our words. So in that context, what literature can do is, as he says, what spring can do to cherry trees. That means, obviously, it can awaken us, it can provide us with great awakening in that particular context. So as a man of letters, as a writer, as a person who expresses himself creatively, Pablo Neruda makes this statement. And Will Durham very significantly makes this important point. What is true education? True education should lead us to humility. Education is a progressive understanding of our own, say, ignorance. And he uses the word discovery. Right? Education is a progressive discovery of our own ignorance. Now, in the next point that I would like to make is, literature is a creative act. Now, by the word creative, we should not mean unconnected to reality, unconnected to the life that we lead. By creative, we mean, let's say, to provide us with perceptions, to provide us with significant attitudes, to provide us with a means to understand life better. Because we need to look deeply, right? We need to obviously look very deeply. So it is a creative act, and every writer embodies his or her consciousness in an enduring form. Consciousness is fleeting, in the sense amazing states of consciousness are fleeting, but those fleeting states of consciousness get an enduring form when it becomes a poem, when it becomes an excellent prose piece, when it becomes play. Right? When it becomes a play, it obviously acquires an enduring form. And that leads us to this important question, that literature leads us to the higher utilitarian value. Now, you cannot quantify the purpose of literature. You cannot quantify the value of literature because it has a higher utilitarian value. It's associated with our mind. It's associated, or rather, it directs our mind. It directs our heart, and obviously, it takes us to the soul. So, in that context, it has a higher utilitarian, say purpose, value. Leo Tolstoy, let's say, made this important statement that you have this activity using external science, and this is a handing over, right? As an act of any act of literature is an act of handing over what the poet has gone through at a significant moment in his or her life, and more importantly, you get infected with those feelings, right? You get infected with those feelings. In other words, literature's great value lies in our power of empathy. Sympathy is very important, but empathy leads us to sympathy. Our humaneness is directed by this capacity for empathy with regard to literature. Right? If we can empathize with literature, great literature, valuable literature, we need to obviously define literature, which I'll quickly go through later. Right? How do you look at literature? What is literature today? And for me, if literature can preserve humanity, if literature can speak about the value of diversity, if literature can speak about the importance, let's say, of, say, wide variety of discourses, all relevant, let's say, to our modern life, then it can obviously count as literature. Now, Hegel obviously hierarchized the fine art forms, as they are called. Utility arts are a table, fan, and things like that, but fine arts will refer to music, which uses the medium of sound, literature, which uses the medium of language, painting, which uses the medium of color, sculpture that uses the medium of wood or stone, and architecture obviously uses stone. Now, what is most important is the medium, let's say, is what we come to, say, grips with, which is in the context of literature, language. The value of poetic language. The poetic language is supposed to obviously touch us, like we used the particular term earlier, right? It awakens us. It lingers in our mind. Right, it lingers in our mind, and you go over it again and again and again. And in significant moments of life, you have great lines from great poets flashing on our consciousness as though it were an SMS from God. So in that context, let's say you see that the purpose of art is self-knowledge, self-awareness, because it gives expression to spirit's understanding of itself. Right, and obviously it's different from philosophy and religion in one sense. And the objects that we use, as we said earlier, conjured out of stone, color, wood, words, render the freedom of spirit. Right? Render the freedom of spirit visible to the audience, let's say, or the readers in that particular context. So what is very important is this, let's say, that we need to understand that literature's value is self-knowledge or self-awareness in that particular context. Now, I'd like to go to Tagore, a very significant statement that he made, right? When he talked about the surplus in a human being, right? Human beings create because they have a surplus in them, that they are not merely satisfied with the basic needs of life. Since the cave men and women to, let's say, our own robotized millennium, the capacity to create has always been an abiding passion in all of us. Right? It has been an abiding passion in all of us. And Tagore makes this statement, man or woman has feeling that he or she is truly represented in something which exceeds himself or herself. Right? Meaning that there is something more in you, which is when you come into contact with the world, when you experience this world at large, then you are able to obviously look at this world very differently. And we need every single meaningful perception coming from every single human being who, say, is able to, as said earlier, say, give that consciousness in an enduring form. Right? So, and that I'm interested in this statement that he makes. He is aware that, or he or she is aware that he is not imperfect but incomplete. Right? It's a beautiful, say, typical Indian statement that we have to understand that in order to achieve a completeness, we need to preserve our humanity. And this preserving humanity is not only with regard to human beings, but with regard to the world at large, the way we connect to the world of nature. And within humanity, the way we connect, let's say, to wide variety of human beings, wherever they are, whoever they are, without stigmatizing them, without labeling them, right? If you are able to preserve that particular humanity, I think that is the surplus that we will have. So in one sense, for me, the surplus in man or woman, let's say, is that supreme spiritual potential that all of us have to expand, right? To go beyond oneself, to go beyond the confines of one's own ego and able to embrace the world at large, embrace the cosmos at large. So what is to be understood here? By preserving humanity, we move from not imperfection to perfection, but we move from incompleteness to completeness. So great artists are actually urging us on to become complete, right? Are urging us on to become complete. Next slide, please. Now, when you define literature, right, as a body of written works, let's say, we understand that it is imaginative. Right? It is an next. Thank you. Next, when you talk about this idea, the next point that we need to make is that they are imaginative works of poetry and prose, which has intentions of the authors, and you need to believe that they have an aesthetic excellence because of their artistic execution. Now, this is a traditional idea, right? This is a traditional idea, meaning, let's say, the purpose of literature is to, and what does imagination do? If you ask that question, right? What does imagination do? Imagination is that supreme faculty in all of us, which provides us with perceptions, which provides us with insights. Imagination is not otherworldly, right? Need not be and should not be otherworldly. This world is so important to us that imagination should never lead us from here to somewhere. And even if you go somewhere, taking the romantic paradigm, you need to come back here, right? You need to come back here. Like Robert Frost brilliantly said, the woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep here, right? I have promises to keep in this world. And we need to keep our promises, which I told you is an ethical living and a responsible living towards all of humanity. And humanity also today, let's say, includes the non-human, right? It includes the non-human. So when you say that it is imaginative, I said imagination is the capacity that all of us have to have perceptions, right? Perceptions and insights. And if you are not able to express it, at least we will be able to share it, right? In order to empathize with the great work of art, we need to have imagination. So we are not devoid of it, right? We are not devoid of it. We are just that, let's say, we fall short of that supreme capacity to not only have insights, but also the capacity, let's say, to articulate those visions and those insights. And the second part leads with language, right? Language of literature, which I told you is, say, associated with the power of suggestion, right? Dhvani, as we use in Sanskrit poetics. So in that context, we talk about the power of poetic language to linger in our consciousness, linger in our mind, linger in our hearts. And why should they linger? Because it can come at the right time and provide you with that comfort that you need. It can come at the right time to provide us with the light, let's say, that we need in our own dark moments while existing, while living, right? And as Eliot said, we should never lose life while living, right? When you preserve humanity, you will never lose life while living. So one important point is that poetic language is important. You need to preserve it. You need to keep it intact, right? Because as I told you, it has infinite capacities to constantly provide you with new meanings. Whether you make a political reading later also, it is capable of providing you with those insights, which I will deal with later. Then it is obviously of a national origin, right? You talk about British literature, American literature, Indian literature, right? African literature, and within Indian literature, you speak about indigenous literature, right? Subaltern literatures. For all this. So when you say that it's of a national origin, obviously that locale, that space obviously contributes to the mode of thinking, the mode of perception. Every work of art is connected to a historical period, but it can transcend in a different sense, in two different senses. One, traditionally, that it can become universal. Now, politically, it can transcend so that you'll be able to see the same pattern, let's say, while you live now. And it obviously has its own genres and subject matter. Scott Fitzgerald made a very significant statement. The beauty of all literature lies in our discovery that our longings are universal longings and that we are never lonely and isolated from anybody. We belong, right? All of us need to belong to this particular world. Now, the sense of belonging for me, as I told you, is an ethical, moral responsibility of every human being, making everything and everybody belong. Right? Making everything and everybody belong. So what do you mean by belonging? Let's say, as I told you, belongingness leads to moral responsibility. not condescension, not the capacity to take care, right? With that sense of superiority, no, that supreme capacity to empathize, to love, as we used the term earlier. And Foster, again, very significantly talked about the power of literature to transform. Literature transforms us, right? And more importantly, it takes us very close to the artist, whoever that artist is. He can be a painter, she can be a musician, the singer, she can be a, say, writer, he can be a sculptor, whoever they are. Let's say we get very close. And what is getting close to the writer? You share, you become a co-sharer of that vision, right? But that vision must be all-inclusive. That vision definitely must be all-inclusive. Right? It should never be exclusive at any point in time. Right? Good literature should never wall out humanity. It walls in always. And then you begin to share that creative impulse. Now, the next slide deals with this idea of the title itself very significantly. Now, why this question? Is there a pessimism that literature has lost its value? Literature has lost its vitality? Elizabeth Drew, in her book, A Modern Guide, Poetry, A Modern Guide Towards Understanding and Enjoyment, makes a statement that people have complained or are complaining that appreciation for poetry has declined. Right? Appreciation for poetry has declined, appreciation for literature in general has declined, that it has become very small and specialized, say only small and a specialized audience respond to it, that it has become a private cult, and let's say that it has become unintelligible to the ordinary reader. Right? This is the pessimism. Right? It's a very gloomy perception of literature, that literature has gone. Let's say literature is gone, literature has lost its vitality. No, I don't think it is true, because she herself says that pessimism can be true only if men and women cease to write poetry. And they don't. Right? As, let's say, this conference is happening, you can imagine a poet writing somewhere something. Right? Some writer somewhere is already, say, putting on paper or typing those great insights that has affected him or her at this particular point in time. So writing has never ceased. So I don't think there is a need for this pessimism. Right? Now, you need to reach out, no doubt about it. It appears to be a private cult. That's why those departments are available. Literature departments are available. Language departments are available. Right? And that's why, let's say, we do make science students also do, say, certain courses in literature to have that amazing balance. Right? One cannot live without the other. Right? Poetry is the countenance of all science, Wordsworth said. So in that context, what you see is that this pessimism is unwarranted. You can dispel that doubt that whether poetry will exist in future. No, it is being read. It's there in magazines. It's there read by everybody. Film songs, some great film songs, let's say, also contribute to our understanding. The great poet Kannadasan, let's say, nourished the imagination, the mind and the hearts of people, let's say, he still does, let's say, he continually, let's say, enriches our imagination, continually, let's say, makes us move towards humanity. Right? You don't dismiss him as a film writer, a film as a songwriter. His songs, let's say, have been too inspiring. They have continued to be inspiring. So poetry is not dead. Poetry is alive. Poetry will obviously be alive. And then, let's say, though we say that's exactly what we mean by robotized millennium, in spite of all we hear of the sterilizing effects on the arts, on our mass civilization and materialistic standards, there is no slackening of artistic output. Now, very interestingly, long time ago, Matthew Arnold said the future of poetry is immense because it's poetry which is worthy of its high destinies and race as time goes on. One will find an ever surer and surer stay. Right? Frost called it stay against confusion, which I used as an expression earlier. And it's also Arnold who very clearly said the purpose of poetry is to question all creeds, to dislodge all accredited dogmas, right? To question the received tradition and look at it anew, right? And that's the subversive potential of literature, as we call it. Arnold had anticipated that. I don't accept things that will not hold good, let's say, in contemporary society. That's why we said normally the history of literature is infinitely connected to the history of poetics. Right? History of literature is connected to the history of poetics. Now, Eliot very significantly said, our concern was speech. And speech impelled us. Now, by speech, obviously, Eliot means poetic speech, poetic utterances. And he says it is poets who purify the dialect of our tribe, right, which is the language of people. Meaning, when you change the language of people, you are changing the culture of people. You are changing the mindsets of people. You are changing the heart-related problems of people, not the physical one. Right? And it can urge mind to after sight. In other words, you purify language of its cliches. The power, the language, the poetic power, let's say, that rests in every beautiful utterance. Beautiful, not only in the aesthetic sense, but in a political sense, in a social sense, in a cultural sense. Right? And you take this famous line, let's say, and what is the purpose, let's say, of poetic language? What is the purpose of the speech? To urge the mind to human insight. And the final aim of the poet is obviously to produce that result, which is having an insight. When Eliot said, I have measured out my life with coffee spoons, what he meant was, let's say, that we were not savoring life very well. And that number two, our life has become too conventionalized, right? As conventional as the parties during which you have a cup of coffee. Now, the next slide will deal with two important, say, perceptions. I'm not going to read through the whole one. One is by Jean-Paul Sartre in his essay, Why Write? He says, what is the purpose of art? The purpose of art is to provide us with this feeling that we are in essential relationship with the world. Right? Essential relationship with the world. And the last point that I would take, let's say, the highlighted one, say the purpose of poetry or the purpose of literature, right? The function of his gaze or her gaze, let's say, very patriarchal, her gaze is not to reveal by stroking them, it refers to words, the sleeping words which are waiting to be read. Now, sleeping words, very beautiful metaphor, words that can be awakened by us and will awaken us. Right? We can wake up the words in a poem by making it dynamic. Static words on a printed page can be transformed into dynamic language, and that dynamic language purifies us, it awakens us, right? And then he makes a significant statement. The poet neither foresees nor conjectures, but he projects, right? He projects. His job, going back to the famous line, say by William Shakespeare, you hold a mirror up to nature, a faithful mirror up to nature, not a concave one, not a convex one, but a good mirror up to nature. You project, right? And when it gets projected through human consciousness, then insights obviously become immensely possible. Now, a shift in perception happened when theory came up, which I will quickly go through, right? What has happened very interestingly is that today we see literature, say, fitted into ideology, right? Literature is connected with ideology, right? Social ideologies and political ideologies. And more importantly, we have understood that literature has also been used for nefarious activities, meaning to project an ideology, to keep an ideology living, right? Which leads us to that great writer Michael Foucault, who talked about the nexus between power and knowledge, right? The nexus between power and knowledge. The next slide obviously will deal with quickly and go through the different trajectories that have happened in the context of the history of poetics, right? It began with literary criticism, right? It began with literary criticism, which is obviously and which dealt with what you call the understanding of aesthetic relish, and more importantly, that which dealt with the kind of personal catharsis. Right? Literary criticism, what is poetry? What does poetry do? Who is a poet in a very generic sense? All those questions were asked. Now, when formalism came into existence in the 30s, it became literary interpretation, where they considered literature to be, let's say, an autotelic and autonomous entity, unconnected to the author, unconnected to the socio-political conditions from which he or she, let's say, comes from. Then, let's say, came in literary theory, which situated literature in various sources of production, where the idea of power comes into being. And then it became theory, culture theory, when literature has become one of the important discourses, right? A very significant discourses. I just deal with one point there. Literary theory refers to any principles derived from an internal analysis of literary text or from knowledge external to the text, which will lead to author and the social background and other cultural issues. And it should be applied in all interpretative, say, conditions. I'll quickly go through these two slides, the following slides, with the different approaches to literature, which as I told you, is also the history of poetics, right? It began with the structural approach. Then next slide, please. It began with the structural approach, which dealt with, say, close reading, right? It dealt with close reading, right? Next slide, please. Where we saw about the interrelations, let's say the interrelations between the basic elements in a poem, in a play, in a prose work, right? In a novel, in a short story. But more importantly, structuralism made the reader aware of the commonly circulating images and icons within a particular culture. Right? In other sense, we almost were able to see certain commonalities, critical and creative commonalities within literature, and that's exactly what structuralism did. Then came deconstruction, which dealt with a very important point, the, say, constant instability or inherent instability of language itself, leading to a layered openness, right? Or what Barbara Johnson would call, every text has its own opposites. It has its own warring forces of signification. Post-colonial reading came into existence when we understood that representation obviously has to do with power relations, right? Who represents whom, and how does one does that, let's say, is an important question. And when you represent, let's say, improperly, then post-colonialism addressed that, right? Any improper representation will be taken up for analysis, right? Will be dethroned, will be questioned radically. And that's the purpose of post-colonial reading. Marxists obviously dealt with the cultural practices as power instruments of social organization, exploitation, and domination. New historicism, very interestingly, is that which brought within, let's say, the ken of literature, all the diverse texts that can possibly be there, all cultural texts, right? As he says, it can be songs, popular, ballads, jokes, anecdotes, everything and anything, let's say, came into, let's say, the ken of literature. In other words, literature expanded itself to be so inclusive, right? So inclusive. Next slide, please. It obviously dealt with feminism and gender, where feminism and masculinity studies were taken into consideration. Psychoanalysis obviously not only read the psychological, say, impulses in characters, fictional characters, but obviously, say, focused on the author, the text, how it is produced, and more importantly, the author-text, say, relationship, and reader response criticism, and so on. And the last one here in this particular slide is the idea of eco-criticism, eco-critical, say, reading, right? What began merely as a say a study which talks about literature and its interface with the natural environment has obviously expanded itself. It's widened its horizons, let's say, to such a great extent that it links with our pedagogy, our teaching methods, right? Our modes of understanding, right? The modes of critical analysis of literary text. In other words, you have a lot of proactive possibilities with an eco-critical reading. I think Dr. Swarnalata will say deal with it in great elaboration because she's an adept in this particular field. So in that context, let's say you have critical analysis of literary cultural texts, right? You have an analysis of this particular thing, and political ideas, let's say, come in, where like animal rights, say climate change, global warming, exploitation of natural resources. Now we understand what we mean by preserving humanity. Right? By preserving humanity, we need to be aware. We need to be aware of all these things. So a personal catharsis, you read a poem, you feel happy about it, you have an aesthetic relish. No, ego-criticism will not agree to that. Right? You may have that. You may obviously have that private joy of reading an excellent poem, enjoy. But does it lead to proactive possibilities? It's a very important question. And that's the purpose, let's say, of ego-critical reading. Now, with regard to eco-critical mission, in the next slide, I'll speak about language. I've already spoken very briefly about the power of language, right? The power of poetic language, right? Now, I'll speak about the need for preserving language, right? G. N. Devi is one of the, say, most important writers, let's say, with regard to eco-criticism today. And what he says is very important. Like we preserve monuments, we should preserve languages. Right? It is definitely, say, different, but the energy that is spent to preserve a monument is wasted if we don't, let's say, spend that energy to preserve a particular language. Right? And what does language do? He says it preserves the community. Right? It preserves the community, and unless a language is in circulation, the community is gone. Right? It leads to a moribund state. Right? It's dying. So what we need to do is, let's say, the most important thing that we need to do with regard to language, right? When I say the value of language in my title, it's not only the value of poetic language, but the value of language of the indigenous peoples. Because as he rightly says, it enshrines a collective unconsciousness, right? The language of the indigenous people, the tribals as we call them, who provide us with amazing alternative points of view, say, have what you call the preservation of the community itself, right? And you have the collective consciousness of the given community, and most significantly, it has what you call an amazing worldview. And worldview is an insight. Worldview is a perception. Worldview is a very significant mode of understanding this particular world. And he says very significantly, who wants to destroy this language? He says very clearly, the people who believe in vandalizing the earth's resources in the name of development are the people who will not like to have this language, because this language or that worldview or that culture or that community firmly believes that human destiny belongs to the earth and not to obviously offend the earth by claiming it. Right? You belong to the earth, you don't make the earth belong to you. Right? That sense of possession. Right? That sense of possession. Right, that the huge phenomenon called Anthropocene today, huge human impact on life, let's say, in a very short span of time. So G. N. Devi uses a beautiful expression, phonocide. Ecocide is destroying, let's say, the ecological balance in this world. Phonocide is destroying language. Right? It's our collective responsibility to ensure that they do not face a global phonocide to let loose on time. Now, quickly, I'll take the second part of my talk, let's say, which deals with theatre, right? When theatre, say, began as personal transformation, It has obviously moved to socio-political transformation, or in other words, to bring about changes. Now, in that context, I wish to speak about say Shakespeare. Next slide, please. I wish to speak about Shakespeare primarily because he's one author who has been circulating, right? Who is there, let's say, in every part of the world, in whichever form. Let's say you shape him. I will not say you mangle him out of shape. That will be a colonial attitude. You don't mangle Shakespeare out of shape. Let's say you shape Shakespeare to suit your convenience, your worldview, right? Your conveniences, your aesthetic beliefs, right? Your own understanding of language or your own modern presentation. Now, Harold Bloom said that Shakespeare must not be subjected to critical analysis, particularly using ideological positions. And he argued that you caricature Shakespeare's energies, right? You caricature Shakespeare's energies. So, in other words, you can believe that Harold Bloom firmly believed in Anglophone Shakespeare. But Jonathan Gill Harris says that all these movements that I listed last time, let's say in the previous slide, from structuralism to eco-critical reading, Shakespeare has obviously been subjected to all kinds of readings, and very significantly, he says theory is not straightforwardly foreign to Shakespeare as it is already Shakespearean. As I was telling a friend this morning, I say what is important is, like every age studied Shakespeare and foregrounded itself. A romantic reading of Shakespeare foregrounded romantic age. A Victorian reading of Shakespeare foregrounded the Victorian age. Every school of criticism foregrounds itself, achieves its own clarity by using Shakespeare, right? And to have what you call a dialogue with Shakespeare, as Jonathan Gill Harris says. And the last point with regard to Shakespeare is, let's say, you need to obviously drag him into as many cultures as possible through intersemiotic translations, which you may call adaptations, or you may call a creative endeavor, which we call an auteur theory today. Right? The director or the author, let's say, becomes an auteur. Then you go to Shakespeare, completely change it, let's say, to suit your own creative needs, your own critical needs. So whether it's an intersemiotic translation, right? Or let's say you talk about, say, theoretical positions, don't forget all of these impact performance of Shakespeare. Shakespeare is meant to be watched. So as Shakespeare said about Bottom in Midsummer Night's Dream, Bottom thou art translated, we should say Shakespeare thou art translated. Right? He has obviously been translated into multiple cultures through intersemiotic translation. But the purpose is, right? The purpose is cultural literacy. That's the only way literature can provide us with that ambience of linking us with multiple cultures, right? Linking us with multiple cultures. Cultural literacy is a need of the hour within our own country. Understanding multiple cultures. And understanding multiple cultures from, say, outside of our own country is much needed. Then I'll quickly speak about theatre very, very briefly, let's say, so that we speak about the next one. Now, what is most important? Next slide, please. The next one deals with performance space. Now, a performance space or a performative space is a space for transformation. Right? Even closet dramas are being performed today. Closet dramas were only primarily meant to be read. And then there came something called absolute drama, right? Where it created a wonderful illusion of reality without no level of fictional mediation, right? No narrator figures, no breaking of the illusion while performance. It created a world in front of your eyes, and that world lingered until the play came to an end. Now that was given up when epic drama came of Brecht, right? When he broke that illusion deliberately using certain means, certain say provisos, he completely altered our perception of theatre, using that important word alienation effect. And alienation effect employed many anti-illusionist dramatic techniques, right? And what it did very interestingly is to make us believe the illusion of life itself and to point to the illusory state of our own life, the theatrical quality of our own life. Now, when you talk about theatrical communication with regard to language, right? Theatre is, next slide, please. Theatre is a place for, say, communication. Or the theatrical space is a communicational space where the author, the playwright is the primary author, the director and his or her collaborators become secondary authors. Next slide, please. Next slide. Right, and what is most important is when all non-fictional characters, meaning all agents, are real people. The director is real, the playwright is real, the actors are real. So their major purpose is to communicate. And what do they communicate? And we know that the visual medium has a better impact, always has a better impact, right? Plays are more powerful, right? When a poem is dramatized, when a short story is dramatized, when a movie, when a novel is dramatized or seen in the filmic mode, it obviously exerts a huge influence on our imagination. So the purpose, let's say, then is to create theaters which can be completely illusory in the sense of absolute drama, but also break that illusion to a big theater. But what is most important is whether you use Kori commentators, whether you break the illusion. What is most important is you address or you are in touch with the audience, right? Whether it is in the previous mode or in this latter mode, you are in touch with the audience. And what is most important, the essentials, as we call them, the performers, the audience, director, theater space, design aspects, right? And what is most important is theater particularly becomes an amalgam of amazing sources of meaning. Right? It becomes an amalgam of amazing sources of meaning. And whatever, let's say, you use verbal action and you use non-verbal action, right? Like they say that it is heard and seen. Drama is heard and seen. Theater obviously is a multimedial narrative where the heard and seen are brought together. Now I'll quickly go through a few theaters, let's say, which deal with life itself. We began with conventional fourth wall theater, which was supposed to deal with the real life and reality. Let's say when you take great tragedies into consideration and great comedies, let's say, into consideration. But conventional fourth wall theater, which created a grand illusion of reality, was given up by and by when life changed, when world wars came into existence, right? When our attitudes changed, particularly with the advent of what you call the theater of the absurd. Now, what I am dealing with is only a representative list. It's not a comprehensive one. Not all the theaters I'm going to deal with, but theaters which obviously are signposts, right? Significant arches, let's say, through which you enter into a different contour of understanding. So, theater of the absurd, which questioned the nature of human existence by presenting a world without logic or morals. And it asked that basic question, like Martin Esslin in that book, Theater of the Absurd, asked, what is in fact is reality? What is verifiable? What is the meaning of our existence? Can language itself communicate between, can be used, let's say, to communicate between human beings? Is there such thing as a character, personality, and individuality? Because all of us live absurd lives. Do we have any distinctness about ourselves? Now, this is a very important point, let's say, of departure from the fourth wall theater, from the conventional fourth wall theater. Then this led to, let's say, what is called the beautiful theater, or a very significant theater of Arton and Artois, called the theater of cruelty. And he wanted to, say, shock the audience, right, through his presentation, through the plays that he performed or he made people perform. He shocked and confronted the audience to go beyond words and connect with the emotions directly. Now you understand, from a personal catharsis, from a personal, say, revolution in standpoint, we say that the whole society, because theater is a community activity, it involves a lot of people, and each one of them in the audience is going to be shocked to, say, a kind of wakefulness, as I used that term earlier. Right? Or you're going to be shocked to wakefulness. And human body became a huge potential for these people. Right? In other words, not that they discounted language, but they obviously questioned the primacy of language in theater, that they obviously foregrounded the importance of the human body in providing us with insights, to providing us with, say, what you call, say, the emotional, say, situations in which we live. Right? And, say, very interestingly, Natasha Tripney says, theater should be an organized anarchy. Right? Theater should be an organized anarchy. Then came the comedy of menace of Harold Plinter, right? Where he said, I write for, next slide, please. We write for, say, ourselves. I write for myself, he said. But why do you write for yourself? It's not mere personal catharsis, but what you think is so valuable, you must address yourself. What you think is so significant. Let's say we live in a world of menace, but he presented it in the form of a comedy. Right? He presented that in the form of a comedy. Then came poor theater, which freed theater from its usual paraphernalia, made theater, in one sense, completely free from what you call all the props that you associate with theater, right? What he considered, say, Grotowski in his Towards a Poor Theater makes a statement, say, he gradually eliminated what proved superfluous. Right? He gradually eliminated what proved superfluous. And in that context, what is important is he again focused on the human body. He sensitized his actors, and in that sensitized mode of performance, they were able to transfer that sensitivity to the audience. Right? It's an amazing transformation. It's an amazing transfer of not only energy, but transfer of awareness, a transfer of understanding, a transfer of perception. And you have a related theater in the context of India called the Third Theater, which was created by Badal Sarkar, influenced by Living Theatre and influenced by Poor Theatre of Grotowski. And what he did very interestingly is, say, he took inspiration from the theater, Living Theatre, which is the theatre of transformation, but he obviously added it with his own understanding of theatre. What is it? He says, with man's consciousness and responsibility. It has more to do with the basic political philosophy, with human beings' consciousness and responsibility, right? And then he created a third theater where every social space became a theatrical space, right? Which I will say deal with in theatre ecology last, right? Every social space became what you call a theatrical space, and all spaces of inaction became sources of proaction when Badal Sarkar presented. It can be a bus stop, it can be a ration shop queue, it can be a cinema theater queue, right? It can be any space which is soaked in insensitivity. But Badal Sarkar will use those spaces to awaken us, let's say, to provide us with that understanding, to provide us with that perception that I talked about earlier. And Vijay Tendulkar very significantly said in one of his interviews, though I wrote plays in order to show that not show in the sense of showiness, but in order to prove that I'm socially committed, I need to participate in protests and things like that. Badal Sarkar did not do that primarily because every act of his theatre was an act of protest. It questioned, right? It questioned the norms, let's say, by which we live. Going back to what Arnold had already said, right? How to own creeds must be questioned. How to own worldviews must be questioned, right? So in that particular context, let's say he created the Third Theatre. And the latest one the last one, let's say, that I will deal with is what is called theatre ecology or environmental theatre. Right? I already spoke about the eco-critical, mission with regard to preserving languages of the world. He makes a very significant statement. Mark Kershaw, in his book, Theatre Ecology, Environments and Performance Events, performance became to culture what water is to nature, an element indispensable to life. Now, very significantly, the argument is that we all lead a life of theatre, that our lives have become completely theatricalized, maybe to use the language of simulation, right? We are all in a simulated world. We are all in a projected world. Let's say not a real world. We are all, in other words, we live in the projected consciousness of a powerful group, that you need to use the same theatre, right? You need to use theatre to address new forms of, global forms of political, economic, mediatized, I like that word, mediatized, and technological change together entered the performative societies. Right? We are all performing lives. Our living is a kind of a performance. But it is too theatrical for comfort. I'm using, the word theatre too negatively charged. Right? When we lead a theatrical life, some theatre has to waken up. Right? Some theatre has to provide us with that understanding. Right? It should obviously kick us out of that slumber. So in that context, let's say the performative societies, theatre ecology, environmental theatre will take issues. Right? Not only, as I told you, within human frame, but also to take the world of nature into consideration. Right? We belong to what you call, let's say, the performative paradigm. Right? A few plays of Mahaseta Devi, many a tribal play, and I read an amazing play by K.J. Baby called Nadu Gadiga, right, which is available in English translation, translated by his wife. Right? That play deals with a particular tribe in Kerala called the Paniya tribe. The whole play, is an amazing play, primarily because in the first part of the play, he traces the history of the Paniya and Adia tribes. And then in the play proper, he deals with the lives of the Paniyas since time immemorial, actually, to use that apparently cliched expression. and see them, let's say, through different time frames where they have suffered, right? Without any attempt, let's say, to eulogize them, without any attempt to romanticize their lives. He provides us with an insight to a living community in Kerala, right? It's not some past characters. They are a living community in Kerala, actually battling to come to terms with this robotized millennium, to use the title of your conference. So theatre ecology is a very important one because it punctures illusions, right? It takes up major issues. That's why I told you ecology has addressed Shakespeare, right? An eco-critical reading of Shakespeare has, say, made us look at plays like As You Like It very differently today, right? Made us look at As You Like It very, not only As You Like It, all plays of Shakespeare can be done eco-critically if you use certain parameters of eco-critical reading or eco-critical thinking. So theatre ecology, let's say, is one of the latest ones that I'm interested in, primarily because it is that which will connect, to go back to Lawrence, connect, let's say, all of us, let's say, to our circumambient universe. And lastly, let's say I go back to the traditional paradigm and what has happened. The last slide, next slide, please. Right? Johnson said, the end of writing is to enjoy life or to endure it, right? A traditional conception, a conception that you can obviously use in our context also, right? Only end of writing is to enable the reader better to enjoy life or endure it. Now we speak only from the personal catharsis point of view, the personal contact point of view with the work of art, or your transactions with the great work of literature. But things have changed. We need to listen to multiple voices, and multiple voices leads to multiple interpretation. You call that a polyphonic reading, right? A polyphonic reading where you decenter the author. Now, why do you decenter the author? The author himself becomes a subject position to be read. The author himself becomes a subject position to be read. You read the author as a part of the text, right? We talked about the author text interface in psychoanalytical reading, right? So you decenter the author or the authorial stance that grants validity to all voices. The authorial intrusion you can talk about, or say the kind of narrate. See, any act of representation can be an act of power relations, which I talked about earlier. So when you decenter the author, every character begins to speak. Like we say, Hamlet escaped the clutches of Shakespeare. Now, many characters escape the clutches of their authors to have or establish their own individual voices, which will lead us, let's say, to bring about a change. So today, the end of, say, a reading or end of writing and the purpose of literature, which is to preserve humanity, is not to endure life. So we will not go with Johnson, not to endure life, but to change the circumstances, right? To change the circumstances of life that will invalidate endurance, right? We need to control the situation rather than merely respond to it. So when you preserve humanity, right, like we said with regard to eco-critical reading, when you talk about a kind of a proactive reading of literature, that's the only source of what you call preserving humanity. And I would definitely say, let's say in this particular context, that with Anand, I would also say that the future of literature is immense. And let us celebrate the power of literature and use literature to become very, very sensitive in life and preserve our own humanity, which is essentially there in all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you for giving your valuable insights, sir. Your speech has opened new vistas of knowledge. Listening to you is like getting enlightenment under the tree of wisdom, and the impact of it on us is going to be great. Thank you once again for making a great start for the day one of our conference. To extend our thankfulness to the guests and gathering, let me propose the vote of thanks.
And I thank Dr. Rama, Dr. Savita, and say all the people who are part of the organizing team for thinking about this amazing topic. And I thank SRM Ramapuram campus for making this conference possible. Thank you very much, and God bless you all.
Ma'am, you are not audible. Rama ma'am, you are not audible, ma'am. On behalf of the Department of English and Other Foreign Languages of SRM Institute of Science and Technology, Ramapuram, I feel extremely honored and privileged to propose the vote of thanks on this auspicious occasion. On behalf of the department, I would like, first of all, to express my profound gratitude to the REST Society of Research International for sponsoring this conference. Without their generous financial support, it would not have been possible to organize this conference. We recognize with gratitude and significant contribution. I profusely thank Professor Ramachandran, member RSRI, who worked tirelessly and coordinated with us in materializing this conference. And we are happy to work with them for the years to come. I extend my hearty thanks to our management heads of institutions and the heads of departments for their enormous support. I deem it a privilege to thank our Dean, Science and Humanities, and Vice Principal, Academic, Engineering and Technology for joining us today. I am thankful to Dr. Ganesh, Professor, Department of English, Madras Christian College, for kindly accepting our invitation and gracing the inaugural function. We have been fortunate to have some of the eminent persons from academia. I take this opportunity to extend my most sincere thanks to all our guest invitees who have associated with us in these 2 days from different destinations. I also would like to thank all the respected delegates for taking their valuable time out and ensuring their presence here. We believe that we got to learn a lot of things from this conference. Words would fall short to describe how much knowledge we could derive from this conference and, of course, the important networks we could create. I take this opportunity to thank the advisory committee and all the reviewers and technical committee members for providing their valuable comments in time and help towards the improvement of quality of papers going to be presented in the conference. I thank all my colleagues in the department for the involvement and enthusiasm shown towards accomplishing the tasks beyond their comfort zones. I thank you all once again for being with us this morning. Thank you. Let us move on to the paper presentation session for day 1. The participants are requested to join their respective sessions using the link that is shared. Thank you all. I request the participants to join at 11:20.